If you haven't heard of permaculture before, here's a basic definition.
The key is in the word.
The word permaculture has changed in its meaning over time.
So the word permaculture is a blending of two words, permanent and agriculture, but permaculture deals with a lot more than just agriculture. So later they expanded it to a blending of the words permanent and culture.
And it's a portmanteau, meaning it's a combined word.
Permaculture, a term coined by Australians Bill Mollison and David Holmgren in their 1978 book Permaculture 1, was originally a contraction of permanent and agriculture, but has since blossomed into a more inclusive combination of permanent and culture.
The idea is that if you can create a permanence in agriculture, that you have the possibility of creating a permanence in human culture.
Looking at the natural systems, by looking at nature, the way it patterns, it works and functions, they coined together a word called permanent agriculture. They found out that the cause root of all the problems that human race is facing on the earth is agriculture. Agriculture is the cause root of most of these problems: pollution, resource depletion, hunger, poverty. If we can do our agriculture system by mimicking the natural system, by understanding everything, and understanding how everything works and find those connections and make those connections, we can make agriculture a sustainable system than how it is now. Because a sustainable system produces enough energy, more than it needs of course, and enough to maintain itself over its lifetime.
Permaculture in itself is nothing new. It's just arranging things that are already there in a different order, so that produces or conserves more energy than it takes.
Started in Australia, modern permaculture did, and I use that caveat a lot. This is Bill Mollison. He is accredited with being sort of the modern grandfather of permaculture. But the thing I want to stress very, very much so is that all these things that we're talking about in permaculture, sustainable, nature-based design integration, this is all based on native and indigenous wisdom. So I'm not here tonight to tell you that this guy from Australia designed the solutions to all of our problems in the 1970s, because that's not the case. This is all based on thousands and thousands of years of folks that knew how to live in harmony and balance with nature. And it's us modern humans that have stepped away from that have said sort of, we know better, we can design these boxy grids and roads where we can just sort of isolate and separate ourselves from nature, and that's not really working out for us anymore. But thankfully, Bill did come along and start asking a lot of these questions in the 1970s. He was an ecologist, a university professor, and him and his grad student, a guy by the name of David Holmgren, they came up with these initial design principles.
They travel Australia, they go Africa, they go South America, and what they doing? They observe. They sitting, they living with the tribe, they observe what is the principles of these people to make continue permanent in this earth.
And very much so what they were focused on in the very beginning was agriculture. There were no words really for sustainable agriculture in the English language at this time. And this was sort of very reactionary. Bill and David, they were looking around at what was going on in the ecological, industrial, and agricultural scene in Australia, and very much so what we're dealing with here in the US today, where we have these large factory farms, monocrop, annual, massive soil erosion, and it was creating all these problems, all these issues. So Bill said, I'm going to take some time off away from the university and spend time in nature and observe. And that's just so critical in permaculture design. It's really the first principle is observation. So that's what these two gentlemen did. They observed natural systems and they started writing books.
So, permaculture is, of course, permaculture has been and continues to be practiced by people all over the world for thousands of years who don't actually call it permaculture. But as a word, as an idea, it started with two Australians in the 1970s, Bill Mollison and David Holmgren. And they compared natural ecosystems with farming. And so they looked at typical natural ecosystem in any part of the world where there's enough rainfall for farming is forest or woodland. And you have tall trees, you have shorter trees, you have shrubs and bushes, you have climbers, Then there's all the roots down below, of course. A huge amount of vegetation, different sizes, different shapes, different functions. And they compared that with the typical agricultural system, say a wheat field, about 1 metre high, even shorter with modern short varieties, one single species, and there's much less biomass production per year, actually. You know, okay, in the woodland you've got the accumulated biomass from previous years of production because it's perennial, but even so the actual annual production of plant and animal matter in the natural ecosystem is far greater than it is on the wheat field. Not only that, but the wheat field requires an awful lot of work. You have to start by clearing away the pre-existing vegetation, then you have to plough, harrow, sow, do some kind of weed control, some kind of pest control, in many parts of the world irrigation, and at the end of the year you harvest and you have to turn around and do it all over again. Meanwhile, the natural ecosystem requires nothing but a bit of sun, a bit of rain, and the rock from which it makes its own soil. And meanwhile, of course, the wheat field is actually losing soil by the process of soil erosion. How happy we would be, they said, if we could create systems which produce our food, which have the high yield, the low need for external inputs, and the lack of negative ecological impact. So, in a phrase, we could say that the aim of permaculture is to produce edible ecosystems. So, when I say edible, it's a sort of a shorthand for meeting all of our needs. You know, we need other things besides food. We need clothes and buildings and so on and so forth. But that's the idea, is to combine the advantages, or let's say to take natural ecosystems and transform them, or take the idea of a natural ecosystem and try to reproduce that in such a way that it will make that it will produce us what we need, our food and so forth.
As Mollison readily admits, permaculture is nebulous.
It's a little difficult to define what the permaculture community is.
But those two words, permanent and culture, hit at the philosophy behind permaculture in the sense that it gives people a set of tools to rethink and redesign their communities so that they can live seamlessly with the natural world. And by working with rather than against nature in order to grow food, for example, permaculture bolsters not only the health of the land, but also its practitioners.
It comes from two Latin words, permanence, to persist indefinitely, and culture, the practices that support human occupation. Put those together, it's a persistent system that supports human existence.